Before any African person, they talk about politicians, they talk about anything. May first think about the way we say they use their hand take cause with it they call calamity upon themselves. How pastor till they look Christians, a church member, now for BBC, now for fair year. When I hear for BBC, I can't say, wonder shall never end. So I can't forget to look for the updates when I reach out because I get many things where they do. So behold, I can't see this video now. This man go put members for fasting. They go fast. They go buy, he go bury them. A lot of them, for those of you who never see this video, make una take look and I go tell una my mind because African people, most of them are fools of what they believe, fools of traditions.
So it's official, about 50 dead bodies have been found in the farmland of Pastor Paul Mackenzie Ntenge, the Kenyan pastor that was making headlines for telling his followers to starve to death in order to see Jesus. Now, we've already talked about the story before. If you haven't seen the previous video, it's on our YouTube. And in the video there, we heard the rumors. No, at the time, we were told that there were suspected case or there were rumors that Paul Mackenzie had or may have buried other members of his church who had fasted to death. At the time, we learned that 15 people were rescued by the police in a community where neighbors saw some people losing weight, starving to death, all in the name of this religious cult that Pastor Paul Mackenzie was organizing. The police had come and had rescued 15 people, and out of those 15 people, about 4 of them died on the spot. That was what we were told at the time. We were also told that the police suspected that there might be a few cases of people who may have died and may have also been buried. Now, we are being told, or we are hearing before our very eyes, that the police have started investigating the farmland that Pastor Paul Mackenzie was working on in Shakahola Forest, where he moved. He used to be in the city before, but due to controversies, he had to shut down his church and his channel and move to Shakahola. Unfortunately, or should I say, weirdly enough, some of his followers, many of them still followed him to Shakahola, where he probably held a church, and somehow, he told them that they all have to die before August in order to see Jesus. And the way he told them to do so was to fast to their death. And now it turns out that other members of the Good News International Church, or should I say Good News International cult, have died mysteriously, weirdly, and they had all been buried in different graves scattered around the forest of Shakahola. It was first reported that they saw 14, then later on they dug more, saw 20, and then it was reported that they saw about 40 graves. And right now, at the time of making this video, the number of dead bodies have climbed up to 58. And it seems like the investigators have not stopped. They are still searching, they are still digging. So there's a possibility that they would find more. One source claimed that a particular grave contained a whole family member that included father, mother, and children. And others were just scattered around. It wasn't particularly a mass grave per se, like we saw in the Kanungu massacre story. This one is pretty much just individual. I guess there's a chance that these victims of these religious cults did not all die at once, which means they may have died at different times in the past or at the start of the fasting. But personally though, if you ask me, I would suggest that an autopsy is done for each victim, because again, like we saw with Credonia Mwerinde and the Kanungu religious cult case, the people who had died previously before the fire had been buried in secret graves were actually poisoned and also deliberately killed. So I'm suspecting that this might not be different. It seemed to me that Pastor Paul Mackenzie really wanted to get rid of his followers. Maybe he got tired of them following him. Maybe he got tired of being a leader. Because clearly for him to shut down his church, close his channel, and move away to a remote village, this clearly means that he was probably done with whatever he was doing. However, his followers really wanted to follow him. They swore to leave education, money, wealth, and everything to follow him. And if he had that much members, how does he plan to feed them or care for them? Because after all, he had made a lot of them quit their job, stop going to school. All of them have to focus on worshiping God and going to heaven. It seems to me like Paul Mackenzie just got tired. He just got fed up and he needed to get rid of them. And being the manipulator that he is, he brainwashed them into fasting forever. Brainwashed them into fasting to their demise. That was probably, or that is his way of maybe getting rid of them. Because let me tell you something. What is a church pastor or a church leader without a congregation? What kind of a pastor not want his congregation to double and increase? Why would he be needing them to die? Why? Unless, of course, he clearly wants to get rid of them, or is tired of them, or he wants to get away from them. This is not about religion. This is not about stupidity. This is a man who just probably got tired of people following his bullshit. And instead of being a weak pastor and tell them to go back to their houses, because that would probably go against all his preaching, he decided to end their lives by making them think that they have to fast to their demise in order to see Jesus. It's just an unfortunate incident. It's a very shocking one that religion up till this day is still causing this much harm. And this is just the one we are seeing and hearing on the news. There are so many more cases like this that we don't get to hear, that don't make it to the news, that pastors even or religious cult leaders still get away with. The Kanungu massacre happened in 2000. It's been nearly 20 years, over 20 years per se, and it's still happening. You would think time has changed. You would think technology and information has gotten spread around the world and people are now more aware. But look at this. A lot of the victims of Pastor Paul Mackenzie are educated people. These are not illiterate. These are people who are graduates, well-to-do, well-spoken, who probably have heard of the Kanungu massacre, who probably know about manipulation, who probably have heard the word brainwashing, and somehow, some way, they still fall victim into such religious atrocity. Clearly, Pastor Paul Mackenzie is not going to get away with this. Obviously, he will be held accountable. He has gotten away with a lot in the past. He has gotten away with a lot of crimes that he has committed religiously in the past. And I think this one, he will be held on the neck. For what is what, if you ask me, the Kenyan government needs to take a blame here. Because if they had locked up this man initially, if they had kept him in prison, if they had held him accountable from the very first craziness, it wouldn't get to this extent. It wouldn't have. It's just very painful and sad. Many of these victims of this starvation and this way of brainwashing into fasting to death are very young people, families, parents. And it's just painful that they were affected by this. It's painful that this happened to them. But if you ask me again, like I've said, I personally don't believe that all of these victims in the grave found in Shakahola Forest all died of starvation. I don't believe. I will say this again, if the police can do an autopsy on each victim, they will find a cause of death that might be different from starvation. Because if you remember, he had a case pending in court where 2 victims starved to death but were suffocated. I don't know if you get what I'm saying. Pastor Paul Mackenzie was already in court of a case where 2 victims had died and their cause of death was, or their method of dying, or the way they died was said to be that they were fasting, they were starving, but they didn't die from the starvation. They got to a point where they starved and eventually they were suffocated. The point is, who did the suffocation? Who did it? I believe this might have probably been the case for some of these victims that was found in the graves in Shakahola Forest per se. I believe that some of these victims, their deaths may have also been directly induced by someone. Some of them had probably starved to a point where they were so weak, and he probably goes to meet them and finish them off himself, probably through the suffocation, as we saw in the previous victims that he did, that is still pending in the courts. But you guys, let me know your thoughts on that part. Do you think all these victims died from just starvation? Or do you think it could have been more? And aside that, many people have criticized the victims. A lot of them have said that, this should not have happened, that nobody put a gun in their head, and that religious manipulation should be, the people who are affected by it should be blamed. And I can see that point, because a lot of them are adults. At the same time, manipulation is manipulation. And someone who is manipulative should also be held accountable. So, as it turns out, again, like I said, I guess the story will develop and we will be keeping track. And for now, the body count has risen to about 58. It seems like it's going to increase by the day, and people are expecting to even find up to 100. So I guess that's what we'll be expecting to see on the news, more bodies found. And hopefully this story goes wild so people know the dangers of being a religious fanatic, being so religious that you don't know the line that you're crossing of being crazy, because this is craziness. Funny enough, some people will still follow this man in the end, because I'm sure all the other victims that were rescued and were taken to the hospital were aware of the other victims who had also passed and had been buried. That was the faith they were going for. That was the point of it, so that they will starve till the end so that they can meet Jesus. Remember, he gave them a deadline and they all must go before August. It's really weird. This man seems like, I feel like there is something. I feel like the police should check his bank account. Maybe he had asked all of them to transfer the money to his account, because we saw that in Kanungo too, where Credonia had asked all the members to bring in their wealth, sell their cars, their house, their land, their animals, and then smoke them all. The police should do some digging on that aspect. Where did the finances of these family men and women go to? Where did the money of these victims go to? Did any of them sell their house? Did any of them sell properties? And if they did, where did they put the money? Who did they send the money to? How much is in Mackenzie's account? And how did he get the money? Because I will not be surprised if that is what it turns out to be. That all these victims all gathered their money and their wealth and their property and gave it to him in exchange for them going to meet Jesus. I will not be surprised, because again, history is repeating itself. We've all seen this before. And it doesn't look like this will be the last time we hear of something like this, because it seems to me that this keeps happening and it's going to keep happening. No matter how the world advances, there will always be people who will fall victim to religious manipulation. There will always be. I mean, who doesn't want to make heaven? Who doesn't want to be rid of their sin? Who doesn't want to see Jesus? Who? It's really hurtful, but I hope the police do a thorough investigation. I'm sure it's going to be broadened. And again, I hope they check the direct causes of each of these victims. And I'm sure they'll find out that it's not starvation. And they also check their wealth and their properties and their money, where it went to, before they all decided to end it all. The police should check these things. And we'll find out that probably Paul Mackenzie and his wife were already planning on jackpiring out of the country or getting away or running.
It always beats my imagination. See you wey don't pass through hell, you go enter Europe. You go come believe wetin be say never help you for your life. I'm not criticizing any religion here. I'm not trying to say this is that, this is this. But one thing I want you to know, that too much of everything is bad. Oyibo when I take the shots. Now the Oyibo na write Bible. Now the Oyibo na invent everything. I get woman where they call me before, where with the guy that they talk all this Jehovah. One day she told me something. She said, now she never give birth for year, but in heaven she go get a lot of. Now I can't tell her and say, if heaven is real, we can't talk. I can't say if heaven is real, hellfire is real. All these people where they come, so we are for they say them, because the way people are going, people are coming. And I believe in changes. I believe some people they go, they come. And I believe in science. So I told her that. I said, so if you think we are going to the end of the world, as she said, because the Bible make it understand to us that we will get to some stages where we'll be seeing different things, negative impact, bad weather, and so on and so forth. So if we are in the end of the world, why should I wake up in the morning and go to work? Is it not better for me to be relaxing, to wait for the end? The woman told me no. He said, you have to fight to the end. She said, you have to fight to the end. So I cannot really understand why my fellow African people, they are so blind. How can the person put our own self into a starving fast to the extent she will eat or her will lose their lives? It's a shame. You people are a disgrace to Africa as a whole. And when I look at the mentality of a lot of African people, I ask myself, what has God done to create some part of Africans? Because it's not helping them themselves, it's not helping people around them, and we are the problems to ourselves. And the bad impacts you people you are creating is affecting the good people. It's so sad, this story. And I pray this man should really go for what he deserves. And do you think prison will solve it? I think it's not going to solve it, because other wicked people like him are still very, very, very much around.